Hi, I just wanted to make a follow-up video. I made a different video about kind of the strength of the evidence against Jonathan Ross, the ICE agent who shot Renee Good, and the likelihood of conviction and some of those issues. But I wanted to specifically drill down in detail on what kind of evidence could be presented in a criminal case against Ross, whether that's before 2029 or after 2029, when a new administration would come in. So I'm going to walk down the list from the way I see it. And I'll talk about one, two, three, four, five, six, six. Write them down to make sure I can remember them, and speak to them. Piece of evidence, and I'll talk them through and how they dismantle a defense's argument of self-defense, or that Ross followed policy or training, which was another possible defense that was offered by Kristi Noem and some others. So the piece of evidence are: he was standing in front of the vehicle. That's one. He shot from the side, twice shot from the side of the vehicle when he wasn't in danger. That's the second piece of evidence. The third is a little different, doesn't get talked about as much, that his fellow officer, his fellow ICE agent, grabbed the door handle of the vehicle, and I'll talk about why that's important. I'll talk about the fact that Jonathan Ross is not a rookie. He's a decades-long veteran of law enforcement and why that matters. And then I'll talk about a couple other mitigating factors that also kind of present an overall, I think, quite strong case. So first one is Jonathan Ross was standing in front of the vehicle in direct contravention of DHS policy. When you stand in front or behind a vehicle as a law enforcement officer, that's called standing in the kill zone, and is flagrant disregard for training. You're always supposed to approach the vehicle laterally, partly because a vehicle can accelerate for whatever reason and hit you. It can drag you under the vehicle. Just a major problem that when you put yourself in danger and then you claim self-defense, that is a very difficult argument to make. Then the second one is that Jonathan Ross fired two of the three shots from the side of the vehicle when he was no longer obviously in any imminent danger, which speaks more to the fact that it's probably an emotional reaction, kind of anger, or some other kind of maybe PTSD from a similar incident that he actually was involved in 2025. Whatever that is, I can't speculate as to that, but it certainly goes against a claim of self-defense. That's two. Then the third one is a little bit different argument, but his fellow officer actually grabbed the door handle of the vehicle. This is hugely in contravention of policy, DHS policy. And the reason is because when you grab a door handle or reach inside of a vehicle, then it creates a major hazard for the officer. Their clothing or arm can get snagged in the vehicle, and they can be dragged along if the vehicle accelerates forward or backward. This is maybe hard to believe, but the officer who shot Renee Good actually was involved in an almost identical incident in terms of the way they approached the car in June of 2025, when he actually approached a suspect, smashed his window and reached into the vehicle, got his arm snagged in the on the vehicle, and was dragged for 100 meters and actually quite severely injured. So the reason that's important is because it goes toward a culture of impunity in ICE, that it wasn't just an isolated incident, but there's a kind of that being in violation of training is habitual. So even though Jonathan Ross didn't do that, it makes an overall prosecution case that training is disregarded as a matter of practice almost. So that's the third one. Grabbing the door handle does not help Jonathan Ross's case, even though he didn't do it. The fourth one is a veteran status. Jonathan Ross has been involved in law enforcement in some way for a very long time, since the early 2000s or mid 2000s. And, he should know better. He knows the training inside and out. It's very difficult for him to make the case that, he hasn't been in similar situations. In fact, there are similar situations where he's done similar things, where he's ignored training. So a pretty powerful piece of evidence there. The fifth one is, this is going to be different from a direct evidence, but it goes very, very strongly to the chance of conviction, and that's just national mood. Back in the early days of 2000, when George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin, for example, the likelihood of conviction was a lot higher because the sentiment of the country had changed. People were recognizing the reality of police brutality, especially toward people of color. And that matters. That matters to juries. That matters to judges. There'll be, if there's a mood of accountability, and there probably almost certainly will be, it's very likely that will affect the outcome of any future prosecution in a way that is not favorable to Jonathan Ross. Then the last thing I'll mention is, if you're going to claim that you acted in self-defense, so immediately after Good was shot and her vehicle crashed, someone, sounds like it was most likely Jonathan Ross, called her an effing bitch. And, I think if you're going to claim that you didn't act out of emotion, it's extremely difficult to do that. I think, almost under discussed piece of evidence that he was clearly emotional, and he was clearly prejudiced toward the victim. And you put all of these things together, and it's extremely difficult to make a case that the majority of jury won't be persuaded by. Whether you get an anonymous jury to vote for a conviction, that's another question. If the trial happens in Hennepin County, let's be real. Hennepin County is a pretty liberal place, and that also helps increase the chance of conviction as well. So you put all these things together, and the likelihood of a strong case for prosecution is very high.